Cody wasn't the type to slow down, not even at 66. He still mowed his own lawn, played catch with his grandkids on Sundays, and never missed his early morning walks with the neighborhood dogs trailing behind him. Everyone said he looked young for his age, strong build, full head of salt and pepper hair, and a laugh that could echo down a street. But one Thursday morning in April, something changed, something small, quiet, and if you weren't paying attention, you might have missed it. He'd just finished his walk, the sun still low, dew on the grass. But instead of feeling that familiar surge of energy, Cody sat on the edge of his porch and didn't get up. He couldn't quite say why, just a strange heaviness in his arms, like he'd been carrying something he didn't remember lifting. His left hand felt oddly numb, not dead, not gone, just off. And it wasn't the kind of thing you'd call an ambulance over. So like most men his age, he brushed it off. "Maybe I slept on it wrong," he muttered, sipping his coffee. That night, he told Sarah, his wife of 43 years. She noticed he was quieter than usual, slower to joke, a little distant. "Something feel wrong, Cody?" she asked, folding towels by the window. He shrugged. "Just tired, I guess." But as he reached for the remote, his fingers fumbled and dropped it. Twice. Sarah looked at him for a long second. "You're seeing the doctor," she said, firm but calm. In that way, women who've seen a lifetime of storms speak. Still, Cody didn't go. Not that day, not the next. It wasn't until a week later when he found himself staring at his neighbor but unable to recall her name, though he'd known her for 20 years, that he began to worry. Something wasn't clicking. His words, once so quick, so sharp, came slower, heavier, like he was wading through water. But it was the vision that finally pushed him over the edge. One morning, he looked at the oak tree in the backyard and saw two of them, slightly overlapping, like shadows refusing to align. At the clinic, the nurse was cheerful, but her eyes narrowed when Cody explained what was happening. The doctor came in 15 minutes later, ordered a scan, and told him not to drive home. That night, they called. He hadn't had a stroke. Not yet. But the doctor used a term that landed like a punch to the chest. "You've had a TIA, Cody, a transient ischemic attack, a warning stroke." Cody didn't say much, just sat in the kitchen staring at the refrigerator, its hum now louder than it had ever been. A warning. His body had whispered something serious, and he'd nearly missed it. He felt betrayed, confused. He'd always been healthy, or so he thought. He ate decently, stayed active, never smoked. This wasn't supposed to happen to him, not now, not like this. Sarah sat across from him, holding her tea like it was a lifeline. "It's not your fault," she said, as if she could hear the spiral in his silence. "But now we know, and now we listen." That night, Cody didn't sleep much. His mind ran loops, memories, regrets, what-ifs. What if the next one wasn't a warning? What if it hit while he was driving with his grandson in the car? What if Sarah had to watch him disappear in front of her, unable to speak or move? These thoughts weren't just fear, they were fire. And for the first time in years, Cody realized his body wasn't invincible. It was trying to speak. He just hadn't been listening. The next morning, he woke before the sun. Not to walk, just to sit, to breathe. The numbness in his hand had faded, the double vision gone. But something deeper had shifted. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror and looked into his own eyes, really looked. There was fatigue there, yes, but also something else. A quiet resolve, a man who'd been given a second chance. He started small. Not with kale smoothies or marathon workouts, but with something even more difficult, slowing down, listening, noticing when his body whispered. He changed the way he moved through his day. He paid attention to how often he felt tired, and not just physically. He kept a little notebook, jotted down things he used to dismiss, foggy thinking, slight pressure in the head, days when words felt heavy. Sarah noticed. "You're different," she said one afternoon as they sat in the garden. Cody smiled. "Maybe for the better," she nodded. "Definitely for the better." They began walking together, not fast, not far, just enough to feel the wind again. Cody asked more questions. He read about strokes, aneurysms, things he used to skim past in the news, not from fear, but from a sense of respect, for his body, for time, for life. One Sunday after church, his neighbor, the one whose name he'd forgotten, stopped by with pie. Cody greeted her with a grin and said her name first. Her eyes lit up. Sarah smiled quietly from the doorway. Later, Cody told her, "That felt like a little win." She took his hand. It was. Cody's journey isn't one of drama or miracles. It's the story of noticing. of how a few strange feelings, tiredness, numbness, forgetfulness, nearly went unheard, of how our bodies speak long before they shout, and of how sometimes the smallest shifts save us. I tell you this not to scare you, but because I care. Because I've lived long enough to know how easy it is to shrug off the signs, to say, I'm just getting older, to wait one more day. But Cody didn't wait, not after the second time. And that choice made all the difference. Cody didn't used to believe in subtle warnings. In his mind, a problem was a problem. It knocked hard, made noise, forced you to act. That's how it had always been in his years as a fire inspector. If a pipe leaked, you fixed it. If a beam sagged, you reinforced it. But now, at 66, Cody found himself staring down something that hadn't made a sound at all. It had whispered, and he'd almost missed it. He stood at the kitchen counter that Tuesday morning, pouring coffee, when he dropped the mug. It didn't shatter, just tipped onto the mat, splashing hot liquid onto his wrist. He cursed quietly, shook his hand. It wasn't pain that startled him, it was how slowly his hand had reacted. Like the message to catch the mug had gotten stuck somewhere between his brain and his fingers. For a moment, he just stared at his hand. He clenched and unclenched his fist, flexed the wrist, tested each finger. Everything moved, but something was off. He didn't know how else to put it. Sarah noticed. "You all right, hun?" she asked from the table, her spoon hovering over a bowl of oatmeal. Cody nodded. "Just spilled it. No big deal." But later that morning, when he went to button his shirt, his left fingers fumbled again. And when he looked at his reflection in the mirror, his collar askew, a strange chill passed through him. That numbness from the week before hadn't really left. It had just faded into the background. He thought about not mentioning it. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just a pinched nerve. But something in the back of his mind, maybe that whisper again, urged him to speak. So, over lunch, he told Sarah. Not in a dramatic way. Just dropped it into conversation like he was reciting the weather. "Left hand's been acting funny," he said, cutting into a baked potato. "Dropped a mug, couldn't quite feel it coming out of my grip." Sarah paused, her fork in midair. "You mean like numbness?" "A little. It's hard to explain. Just slow, I guess." She set her fork down. "Cody, I want you to call Dr. Ellison." "I know," she interrupted gently. "You don't feel sick, but let's not wait." Cody agreed, not because he felt worried, but because her voice carried the same firmness she used when buckling the kids' seatbelts back in the 80s. And something inside him, a quiet, reluctant part, felt grateful. At the clinic, Dr. Ellison ran a series of tests, checked reflexes, balance, eye movement. Cody passed most of them, but there was something in the doctor's eyes, an unease that unsettled him. "Let's schedule a scan just to be safe," Dr. Ellison said. "Your blood pressure's a little high today, and I want to rule out anything serious." 2 days later, the scan results came in. The words weren't dramatic, but they clung to Cody's ribs like fog. Transient ischemic attack, a warning stroke, a temporary blockage in the brain, no permanent damage, but a red flag waving in silence. Cody sat still, eyes fixed on the doctor's lips, barely hearing the explanation. The walk to the car felt longer than usual. Sarah didn't say much. She held his hand. Her grip was warm, steady. He felt the whisper now, not from his body, but from the space between them. Life had tilted ever so slightly. That night, Cody couldn't sleep. He lay in bed listening to the tick of the clock. He thought about how the signs had been there, a fog in his thinking, that moment he forgot his neighbor's name, the fatigue that hit him after a short walk. All whispers, all easy to ignore. But now, those whispers had weight. They weren't just symptoms, they were messages. He got up quietly, careful not to wake Sarah, and padded into the kitchen. The moonlight painted silver streaks on the floor. He sat with a pen and a scrap of paper, unsure why. Then he began to write. Not a list, not a plan, just words, feelings, fragments of awareness. Hand felt off again. Forgot name again. More tired than usual, not normal tired. Something's not right. He folded the paper, slid it into his wallet, not to show anyone, just to keep. A way to say, I'm listening now. That was the first time Cody truly understood the difference between something being wrong and something beginning to go wrong. The body doesn't always scream. Sometimes it sighs, it stutters, it delays, and if you're not quiet enough, still enough, you'll miss the moment you could have acted early. In the days that followed, Cody found himself paying closer attention. not in a panicked way, but with the same curiosity he used to bring to fire inspections, looking for small shifts, slight temperature changes, the hairline crack before the collapse. He sat longer in the mornings, listened more when Sarah spoke. He didn't rush the coffee. He didn't ignore the extra beat his heart seemed to skip. He made notes, not out of fear, but respect. His body had warned him, and now he owed it the same courtesy. Cody never would have called it a symptom, not at first. It felt more like fog. Not the thick, heavy kind that blankets a road, but the subtle kind that floats just above the ground on a cold morning. Barely visible, easy to drive through, until suddenly you can't see what's ahead. That morning, the fog was in his thoughts. He'd gone into the garage to find the screwdriver, just the Phillips head, same drawer as always. But when he opened the drawer, the tool he'd reached for 100 times didn't register. His hand hovered, he stared, shapes blurred into one another, and for a full minute, Cody couldn't remember which one it was. He laughed it off, kind of. "Guess I'm getting old," he muttered aloud, even though no one was there. He ended up taking all the tools out until the right one clicked. Still, the moment stuck with him, like a pebble in his shoe the rest of the day. It wasn't the forgetting, it was how blank it had felt, like someone had dimmed the lights in his brain. Sarah noticed again, she always did. That afternoon, she found him standing by the sink, staring out the window like he wasn't really looking at anything. "You good?" she asked, drying her hands on a towel. "I just had a weird moment earlier," he said, still facing the window. "Took me a while to find a screwdriver, not because it was lost, just couldn't remember which one it was." She came and stood beside him. "You've used that tool 1,000 times." "I know," he said quietly. "That's what made it weird." They stood in silence for a beat. Cody wasn't the kind of man who admitted confusion easily, not after a lifetime of being the one everyone leaned on. But now, it felt safer somehow, like the fog wasn't just his to hold. "You've been sleeping okay?" Sarah asked. "Mostly. I wake up kind of tired, but I figure that's just, life." Sarah turned to face him. "Cody, you've always been sharp. If something feels off, it probably is." He nodded, but the worry had already crept in, not loud. Not like panic, just that same quiet whisper, again, something small inside him saying, "Pay attention." That weekend, he went for his usual walk, just a couple miles through the neighborhood. He passed the Johnsons' place. Roger was out front watering the bushes and gave his usual wave. But halfway through, Cody had to stop. Not from pain, just exhaustion. Deep, bone-level tiredness, like the wind had been knocked out of him. He leaned against a mailbox, hands on his knees. His heart wasn't racing, his legs didn't hurt, but he felt like he'd walked 5 miles, not 2. A neighbor drove past and gave a little honk. Cody straightened up quickly and waved like everything was fine. But the truth was, something wasn't. Again. Back home, he showered, sat down with a glass of water, and waited for it to pass. The tiredness did fade, but in its place came a thought he couldn't ignore. This isn't just aging, this is something different. He remembered what Dr. Ellison had said the week before about high blood pressure, how it could creep up without warning, especially after 60. Cody had been borderline for a few years, but never took it seriously. "My numbers have always been a little high," he used to say, brushing it off like everyone else did. But now he thought about how pressure builds in pipes, slowly, silently, until one day it bursts. That night, he did something he hadn't done in months. He pulled out the blood pressure monitor from the hall cabinet, sat at the table, placed the cuff on his arm, and pressed the button. The numbers blinked into view, 156/92. He sat back, exhaled, measured again, this time 160/94. He showed Sarah. "Should I be worried?" he asked, the calm in his voice not quite matching the worry in his eyes. She didn't say much, just picked up the phone and called the pharmacy. The next day, Cody had a check-in scheduled with Dr. Ellison. At the appointment, the nurse didn't say anything when she saw the reading, just scribbled something and left. Dr. Ellison came in a few minutes later, closed the door softly, and sat. "Cody," he said, "this is the second time your pressure's been high in 2 weeks. We're past the keep an eye on it phase." Cody nodded. "I figured. It's not just about the numbers, it's about the wear and tear. High blood pressure can quietly damage your arteries over time, including the ones in your brain." The doctor paused, then leaned forward slightly. "I know it doesn't feel urgent now, but it is. Your body's trying to tell you something, before something worse happens." Cody sat still. The words weren't new, but somehow hearing them this way, your body's trying to tell you, hit different, like confirmation of the fog, of the screwdriver, of the tiredness. He left that appointment with a small orange pill bottle and a folder of printed tips. He didn't read the papers right away, just held them as he sat in the car, engine running, radio off. Later that evening, he opened the bottle and stared at the pill in his hand. It was small, seemed harmless, but swallowing it felt like a moment of reckoning, like a handshake with reality. Sarah watched him from the kitchen. "Scared?" she asked gently. "Not scared," Cody said, "just paying attention." She smiled, walked over, and kissed the top of his head. "That's the bravest thing you've done in a long time." Cody swallowed the pill, sipped some water, and leaned back in his chair. For the first time in weeks, the fog felt a little lighter. Cody always thought of himself as level-headed. He wasn't quick to anger or prone to stress. Even when life threw curveballs, his brother's passing, the layoffs at the plant years back, he kept a calm center. So when Dr. Ellison said the words chronic high blood pressure, Cody almost laughed. How could someone so steady on the outside be boiling underneath? But the numbers didn't lie. 160 over 94. 162 over 96. They crept higher with every check, even when Cody felt fine. That was the worst part. He felt fine. Maybe a little tired, maybe a little forgetful, but no chest pain, no pounding headaches. Just those soft whispers like the ones from weeks ago, continuing in the background. He started carrying the monitor with him, kept it by the breakfast table like a toaster. Mornings became routine. Warm lemon water, blood pressure reading, silence. The numbers didn't spike dramatically, but they didn't go down either. Cody tried cutting back on salt, said no to bacon once or twice, and even swapped out his usual chips for almonds. Small efforts, tiny rebellions against a lifetime of habits. Sarah, ever watchful, began experimenting too. She replaced their white bread with something grainy and unfamiliar. Cody joked that it tasted like cardboard. Sarah smirked, then told him it was called sprouted grain. "Good for your heart," she said, "full of magnesium and fiber." He didn't argue, not anymore. But the biggest change came one morning, about 3 weeks after his diagnosis. Cody was in the garden, pruning the rosemary bush, when he suddenly felt winded. Not dizzy, not in pain, just spent, like something in him had deflated. He sat down on the patio bench, the clipper still in his hand. Sarah came out with 2 glasses of water and handed him one. "You okay?" He didn't answer at first, just stared at the dirt, the tiny weeds growing between bricks. "I don't feel bad," he said finally, "but I don't feel right either." Sarah sat beside him, her arm brushing his. "That's what makes it dangerous. It doesn't come with flashing lights," he nodded. "It's like living with a hairline crack in a dam. You don't hear it, you don't see it, but one day..." She squeezed his hand. "That's why we patch it now." That afternoon, they sat down with the blood pressure guide from Dr. Ellison. Cody, who used to hate reading instruction manuals, now combed every paragraph. What surprised him wasn't the medicine. It was how much food, sleep, and stress all played into this invisible storm inside his arteries. Sarah brought up something new she'd read. Beets. Beets? Cody raised an eyebrow. Beetroot. Apparently it helps blood vessels relax. Something about nitric oxide. He made a face. "I haven't touched a beet since 1972. "Well," she grinned, "that might be part of the problem." The next day, she made a beet salad. Roasted, not pickled, thankfully. Mixed with arugula, walnuts, and a bit of goat cheese. Cody took a small bite, then another. It wasn't bad. Earthy. Sweet. "Not as terrible as I remember," he muttered, which in Cody speak meant pretty good. Over the next week, it became part of their routine. Tuesdays were beet salad days. Sarah kept the recipes interesting, sometimes tossing in oranges, other times a balsamic drizzle. Cody started looking forward to it, not just for the food, but for what it symbolized. It was a tiny act of power, of participating in his own repair. At the next check-in, his numbers had dipped slightly. 148 over 88. Dr. Ellison gave a soft nod. "We're moving in the right direction." Cody felt something stir in him. Not pride exactly, more like relief. He didn't need to overhaul his life in one giant leap. He just needed to keep showing up, listening, tweaking. One night after their walk, Cody and Sarah sat on the porch watching the sunset melt into orange and purple. "You know," he said, "this blood pressure stuff. It's like fighting something you can't see. No alarms, no pain, but it's there, quietly undoing you." Sarah nodded. "Until you undo it first." Cody smiled, leaned back in the chair. The wind was soft that evening, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a calm that wasn't forced. The pressure hadn't vanished, but now he was meeting it face to face. And maybe that was the whole point. It was supposed to be a regular Sunday. Cody had plans: trim the hedges, fix the porch light, maybe catch the last quarter of the Broncos game with his friend Walt. But when he rolled out of bed, something felt wrong. Not sharp pain, not dizziness, just a dragging heaviness in his bones, like he hadn't slept at all, though the clock said he'd had 8 full hours. He rubbed his eyes, blinked into the light, and sat on the edge of the bed longer than usual. Sarah stirred beside him. "You okay?" she murmured, half awake. "Just tired," Cody said, even though he wasn't sure that was the right word. This wasn't the kind of tired that came from mowing lawns or staying up too late. This was different, deep, like something in him had quietly shut down overnight and hadn't come back online. He shuffled to the kitchen and poured coffee, but even that felt like effort. The mug was heavier in his hand, his thoughts slower. It was like his body had turned the volume down on everything, and now he was moving through life underwater. Sarah walked in, took one look at him, and frowned. "You sure you're all right?" "I'll be fine," Cody mumbled. "Just one of those days." But that one of those days didn't end. Not by noon, not by dinner. He lay down mid-afternoon, something he never did, and drifted into a nap so deep it startled him when he woke. The sun was already low, the hedges remained untrimmed, the game had played without him, and when he stood, his legs ached like he'd run a marathon in his sleep. By Monday, the fatigue had wrapped itself around him like a wet coat. He pushed through, told himself it was a fluke, but deep down, he knew something wasn't right. This wasn't laziness. It wasn't age, it was his body waving a flag, and for once Cody wasn't too proud to see it. That week, he canceled dinner plans, said no to Walt's invitation to the golf range. He felt guilty, even embarrassed, but he also knew he needed to figure out what was happening before it escalated. The scariest part wasn't that he felt weak, it was that the fatigue had no reason, no cause, and it wasn't going away. Dr. Ellison called it systemic fatigue, likely related to reduced blood flow, subtle changes that happen when the brain or muscles don't get the oxygen they need. "Your body is overworking," he said gently, "and it's asking for rest in the only way it knows how." Cody nodded, though a part of him hated the word rest. He'd never been one to sit still. But now it wasn't optional. His body had taken the wheel. Sarah suggested they try something new, something she'd read about in an article from the senior wellness group she followed online. "You might laugh," she said, "but I want to try golden milk." Cody raised an eyebrow. "What's that? Some sort of smoothie?" "Not quite," she smiled. "It's warm milk with turmeric, ginger, cinnamon, supposed to help with inflammation and fatigue." "And sleep," he sighed. "If it'll get me off this couch, I'll drink motor oil." That evening, she brought it to him in a handmade mug, one their daughter had made in pottery class years ago. The drink was warm, earthy, with a faint sweetness from honey. It reminded him of spiced cookies at Christmas. He drank it, and for the first time in days, his body felt like it exhaled. That night, Cody slept, not like before, not like someone merely tired, but like someone whose cells were finally allowed to let go. When he woke, he didn't bounce out of bed, but he also didn't drag. The fog had thinned just enough to make the world look clearer. They made it a habit. Golden milk before bed. Not every night, but enough to become a ritual. Sarah would heat the milk while Cody tidied the living room or sat by the window. They'd sip it together, talk about the day, the grandkids, the neighbors' ridiculous Christmas lights. Simple things. And over time, the fatigue softened. It didn't disappear entirely, but Cody could feel his body thanking him. Not just for the drink, but for slowing down, for paying attention, for treating rest not as failure, but as fuel. One evening, as they sat in the dim kitchen light, Cody looked down at the golden swirls in his mug and said, "I used to think slowing down was a sign of weakness." Sarah smiled. "And now?" He looked at her. "Now I think maybe it's a sign I've finally grown up." She laughed, warm and proud. Cody sipped again, the turmeric coating his tongue. His body still had healing to do. But now, he was no longer fighting it. He was listening, and in that quiet space, healing had begun. Cody always had sharp eyes. He liked to brag that he could still read road signs before Sarah did, even from the passenger seat. No bifocals, no squinting. He even read the fine print on the back of cereal boxes just to prove a point. So the first time his vision blurred, not a lot, just a soft double around the edges, he didn't take it seriously. It happened while he was fixing the kitchen light. He'd climbed onto the step stool to check the wiring, squinting up at the ceiling fixture. For a split second, it looked like there were two of them, one slightly off to the right, like a ghost image hovering just out of alignment. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and chalked it up to the bright bulb. Too much glare, he told himself. Need to change the wattage. But it happened again 3 days later, this time while reading the newspaper. He was halfway through an article when the words began to blur, not into fuzz, but into each other. Letters shadowed themselves. He blinked hard twice and the page cleared. But a chill crept in. That didn't feel like glare, and it certainly wasn't the light bulb. Still, he didn't tell Sarah. He didn't want to worry her. The fatigue, the blood pressure, the new bedtime drink, that was already enough to make them feel like they'd aged 5 years in 1 month. So he kept it to himself. Just drank more water, took more breaks, avoided night driving. It wasn't until they were in the grocery store, walking past the freezer aisle, that it became undeniable. He reached for a bag of peas, turned to say something to Sarah, and the world tipped. Not dramatically, not like in the movies, just slid like the ground had tilted a few degrees. His vision doubled again, then snapped back. But it was enough to make him pause, hand frozen in midair. Sarah turned and saw the look on his face. "What?" she asked, stepping closer. He shook his head, trying to smile. Just felt dizzy for a second. She didn't smile back. "Again?" He hesitated. That was the moment. The fork in the road. Lie to protect her peace, or tell the truth and risk scaring them both. "Yeah," he admitted. "My vision's been weird a few times now." She took the peas from his hand and placed them in the cart. Then she looked up at him. "We're going back to Dr. Ellison." At the clinic, they ran more tests: eye movement, reflexes, balance. Then they scheduled something called a carotid ultrasound, a scan of the arteries in Cody's neck. The nurse explained it kindly. "Just want to check that blood's flowing like it should. Sometimes, vision problems come from reduced circulation in the brain." That phrase stuck with Cody. Reduced circulation in the brain. It sounded like something you'd say about a machine, like rust in a pipe or a weak battery, but this was his brain, his vision, his life. When the results came back, Dr. Ellison showed them a chart. "There's some narrowing," he said. "Not blocked, but tight, especially on the left side." Cody sat quiet. Sarah held his hand. "This could explain the vision problems," the doctor went on. "And they could be precursors to something more serious. The body's giving us another heads up." Cody nodded slowly. "So what now?" "Now we manage it. Blood pressure, diet, stress, medication, and we monitor closely." They drove home in silence. Cody stared out the window, watching the street signs blur past. For once, he didn't try to read them. That night, Sarah handed him a small square of dark chocolate after dinner. "What's this?" he asked. "Flavonoids," she said, sitting across from him. "Good for the eyes and the blood vessels. At least that's what the internet says." He smiled, broke the square in half, and popped a piece into his mouth. Bittersweet, rich, comforting in a strange, quiet way. Over the next few days, they made more changes, less screen time, more walks at sunset when the light was soft and kind. Sarah bought blueberries and kale. Cody started using a cap when they were out in the sun too long, and they kept the chocolate habit. A small square after dinner, like a secret between them. The vision still wavered now and then, but it didn't frighten him like before, because now he saw it for what it was. A message, not an attack, not a betrayal, just his body waving a tiny flag. One evening, as they sat watching the news, Sarah glanced over and caught Cody blinking slowly. "Double again?" He nodded, just for a second. She reached over and rested her hand on his knee. "I'm proud of you, you know. For seeing double," he joked, "for not pretending it's nothing." He smiled, leaned back, and looked at her, not twice, not blurred, but clearly. "Me too." Cody had always considered himself lucky when it came to headaches. He never got them, really. Not the kind Sarah described when the weather changed. Not the kind his daughter used to get in college during finals week. His head was solid, clear, reliable, Or at least it had been, until that morning. It was a Thursday. Cody had woken up a little stiff, a little foggy, but nothing out of the ordinary. He poured his coffee, fed the cat, shuffled outside to grab the paper. But by the time he sat down with the crossword, something was pressing against his skull. Not a sharp pain, but a weight, like someone had placed a stone just behind his eyes. He took a sip of coffee, hoping the caffeine might clear it. But the pressure didn't lift. Instead, it settled, deep, persistent, and oddly one-sided. A dull throb behind his right temple. He closed his eyes and rubbed his forehead, trying to will it away. Sarah walked in, hair still in rollers, and paused when she saw him hunched over the table. "You okay?" "Just a headache," he muttered, not looking up. She crossed the kitchen, put her hand on his shoulder. "That's not something you usually say." He shrugged, reluctant to admit how strange it felt. "Probably just stress. Been a long week." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Cody wasn't anxious. He hadn't been racing around. And though life had shifted these past few months, he'd been slower, more grounded. This wasn't the kind of headache that came from too much pressure. It was the kind that arrived uninvited, without explanation. By mid-morning, the pain had intensified. Not unbearable, but consistent, steady. Every sound seemed sharper. Bright light made him squint. He canceled his afternoon walk with Walt and lay down in the guest room, away from the noise of the TV. Sarah checked on him twice, bringing water and soft reassurance. "You sure you don't want to call the clinic?" she asked. "I'll wait it out," Cody insisted. "If it's still bad by tonight, I'll think about it." But he didn't need to wait that long. Around 3 p.m., he stood up to go to the bathroom and the world tilted. Not completely, just enough to make him grab the doorframe. His legs held, but his vision blinked, his balance flickered, and the headache suddenly flared, sharp and angry. Sarah heard the thud of him grabbing the door and rushed in. "Cody?" He was pale, sweating lightly. It just hit hard all of a sudden. She didn't argue, just grabbed her purse and said, "We're going now." At urgent care, they moved fast. Maybe it was his age, maybe his symptoms, maybe the way Sarah described the earlier vision trouble and fatigue. Within the hour, he was in a scan. The doctor came in soon after. "No stroke," she said gently. "No bleeding, but I'm glad you came in. This headache, combined with your recent history, is a warning sign we don't ignore." Cody let out a slow breath, part relief, part fear. He realized then how close everything was. One more inch, one more delay, and things could have tipped a different way. They drove home quietly. Sarah's hand never left his leg. The headache was fading now, as quickly as it had come, but the memory of it stayed like a bruise, deep, tender. The next morning, Sarah handed him a small container of seeds. "Pumpkin seeds?" he asked. "Magnesium," she replied. "Good for headaches. Natural vasodilator, helps your blood vessels relax. You can put them on your oatmeal," Cody smiled. "I married a pharmacist and didn't even know it." He started sprinkling them on everything, breakfast, salads, even in yogurt. It was a small act, barely noticeable, but it felt like armor. Something he could do quietly, every day, to stand between him and whatever had knocked on his skull the day before. And he slowed down. Again, not because he had to, but because he wanted to notice more, the way his body spoke, the way it hinted and whispered and begged for attention long before it screamed. One evening, as he and Sarah sat on the porch, he said, "That headache, it wasn't like any other." She nodded. "I know. I didn't even think it was possible for something like that to sneak up. It just happened." Sarah squeezed his hand. "That's how the body works sometimes. It whispers, then it knocks, then it breaks the door down." Cody looked out across the lawn, golden in the late light. "I'm listening now." And he meant it. Cody had never dropped his keys before. Not once in all his years had he ever missed the smooth handoff from pocket to palm. He prided himself on those small, unnoticed motions, the everyday choreography of competence. Keys, wallet, mug, button, grip. These were muscle memories, hardwired after decades of repetition, until they weren't. It was a Tuesday morning, and he was heading out to the shed. He'd planned to sand the back porch railing, the one spot where the wood had splintered slightly in the last storm. It wasn't urgent, but Cody liked projects. They made him feel useful, in motion. He reached for the hook by the door, grabbed the keys, and turned, same as always. But the keys slipped through his fingers like water. No thud, no bounce. They just fell. quiet and fast. Cody stared down at them on the tile, then at his hand. He flexed his fingers. They moved, but sluggishly, like he was operating them from a distance. He reached down, picked up the keys, and felt a twinge of delay. The grip wasn't right, too light, too loose, like the nerves were asleep. He shook his hand once, hard. Maybe it had just stiffened from disuse. Maybe he'd slept on it wrong. But deep down, Cody knew better. It was the same hand that had dropped the coffee mug weeks earlier, the same hand that struggled with the buttons. This wasn't random. When Sarah saw him standing by the door, keys dangling loosely in his hand, she tilted her head. Forget something? He opened his mouth, then closed it. For a moment, the words didn't come. I dropped them, he finally said quietly. Her smile faded. Just now, he nodded. Didn't feel it the way I should have. They sat down at the kitchen table together. She didn't ask questions right away. Just poured them both some tea. Cody watched the steam rise and felt a cold grow in his chest. What does it mean when something stops working but doesn't break? He asked after a while. Sarah looked at him. I mean, nothing snapped. Nothing hurts. It's just wrong. Like something's disconnected. She reached across the table and took his hand. It means we don't wait. By the time they got to Dr. Ellison's office, the sensation had mostly returned. But Cody told him everything. The dropping, the delay, the absence of pressure where there should have been certainty. Dr. Ellison performed a few quick strength tests, asked Cody to squeeze his fingers, then to touch his nose with closed eyes. You've got mild weakness on the left side, he said. It's subtle, but it's there. Could be another TIA, could be neuropathy, could be your brain waving another flag. Cody swallowed. Even when the feeling comes back? Yes, especially then. Because it means something changed, and then changed back, which is often how strokes begin. That night, Cody didn't say much at dinner. Sarah made soup, soft bread, a warm silence. When he reached for the salt, he hesitated. Just a second. Enough to make her notice. Still feel it? She asked. Mostly, he said, but I keep thinking, what if one day it doesn't come back? Sarah didn't answer right away. Then she said, that's why we take care of what we can while it does. Later, she pulled out a small container of flax seeds. For your nerves, she said, omega-3s, anti-inflammatory, brain and hand and heart all in one, he smirked. You're turning into a walking health book. Nope, she said, just someone who wants her husband around. The next morning, Cody stirred flax seeds into his oatmeal. Crunchy little things, didn't taste like much, but they made him feel like he was participating in his own rescue. He started noticing his grip throughout the day. How tight he held the steering wheel, how he carried grocery bags, how his fingers flexed and bent. It wasn't obsession, it was awareness. He wasn't taking anything for granted anymore. One afternoon, he sat in the garage, sanding down an old wooden chair. With each pass of the paper, he watched his fingers work. Slowly, carefully, feeling every texture, every ridge, every part of the hand doing its job. He looked down and whispered, "Thank you." And in that quiet moment, Cody realized healing wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was just dropping your keys and then picking them back up, fully present this time. Cody wasn't one to fumble his words. He liked conversation. He liked the rhythm of it, the back and forth, the flow. In his younger days, folks said he had a radio voice, smooth and confident. He gave speeches at retirements, toasts at weddings. Even in everyday chatter, he had a way with phrasing that made people lean in. So when the sentence didn't come out right, he noticed. It was subtle, just a passing comment to Sarah over breakfast. He'd meant to say, the neighbor's dog was barking all night again, but what came out was jumbled. Not gibberish, but messy. The sounds blurred. Barking came out more like barkin. The rhythm broke. Sarah froze halfway to the sink. Cody, say that again? He blinked. What? What you just said. He paused, tried again, slowly this time. The words came, but not with their usual weight. They felt slippery, like he was balancing them on the edge of his tongue. I must be more tired than I thought, he muttered, but he wasn't. He'd slept fine, better than most nights, in fact, and the rest of him felt normal. No headache, no fog, no numbness, just that moment, that strange twist in his speech. Sarah pulled out a chair. Cody, she said, calm but firm. Do you feel anything else? Arm weakness? Face drooping? He shook his head. No, just that one sentence. Still, she said, picking up the phone, we're not guessing on this. At the clinic, the nurse asked him to repeat a few phrases. The sky is blue. It's a sunny day. I took a walk around the block. Cody said them all, slower than usual. The words came, but not smoothly, not like they used to. Dr. Ellison came in, looked serious. Could be a mild aphasia, he said. That's when speech is disrupted, might be from a TIA, or even just a spasm in a small blood vessel. Either way, your brain is talking to us again. Cody sat back in the chair. It's getting harder to ignore, isn't it? Dr. Ellison nodded. Yes, but the good news is it's not too late. Your body is still giving you time. They talked more that day about blood flow, about oxygen to the brain, and how even a momentary lapse, like the one Cody had, was a message. Sarah asked questions. Cody mostly listened. He didn't feel fear exactly, just a growing awareness that his words, his thoughts, his very self could slip away if he didn't stay vigilant. That evening, as they sat on the porch, Cody stared at the horizon. What if next time the words don't come back, he asked. Sarah looked over. Then we meet that moment together, but you're not there. You're here. You're still you. Cody exhaled. It's like my mouth forgot how to be me. No, she said gently. Your body got tired, that's all. You're still in there. He nodded slowly. The next day, she handed him a cup of tea, ginger and green, lightly steeped. What's this one do? He asked. Green tea boosts circulation. Ginger helps with inflammation. Thought it might help the words stay sharp. He took a sip. It was warming, soothing, like it woke something up in him. Cody started doing small exercises after that. Not formal therapy, just talking more, reading aloud to himself, singing along to the old records he used to love. He found that when he hummed to Johnny Cash, the rhythm came back. The words found their way. One morning, while reading the paper aloud, Sarah smiled from the other room. You're getting smoother, she said. Guess Johnny's rubbing off on me. He even started writing little poems, just for himself. Scribbled lines on napkins, in notepads, on old receipts. He didn't show them to anyone. They weren't brilliant, but they were his voice taking shape. One afternoon, he stood at the kitchen counter and said, clearly and calmly, the neighbor's dog was barking all night again. Sarah turned, eyes shining. Perfect, Cody grinned. Didn't even stutter. He was still himself, still Cody. And the words, though they wobbled once, had come home again. Cody had always trusted his footing, whether climbing ladders in his working days or hiking trails with the grandkids. His legs were strong, dependable. So when the world tilted beneath him, not from the ground, but from inside his body, it came as a quiet betrayal. It started at the hardware store. He'd bent down to look at a paint sample, and when he stood, the aisle didn't rise with him the way it should have. It felt like the floor dipped just for a breath. He reached for the shelf to steady himself, pretending to study a can of varnish, hoping no one noticed. He brushed it off. Low blood sugar, maybe. But that evening, as he walked out to the mailbox, the gravel path suddenly seemed uneven. His foot caught the edge of a stone and he staggered. Not enough to fall, just enough to feel foolish and shaken. He didn't mention it to Sarah, not yet. But the next morning, in the shower, it happened again. He turned to grab the towel and lost his balance. His shoulder slammed gently into the wall, nothing serious, but enough to make his heart race. He sat on the bed afterward, towel still around his waist, hands braced on his knees. Sarah came in and saw him, wet hair clinging to his forehead. Cody? She asked. I'm fine, he said quickly. Just got dizzy for a second. She knelt in front of him, drying his face with her hands. This isn't the first time, is it? He met her eyes. No. She didn't scold him, didn't panic, just helped him get dressed and drove them straight to the clinic. Dr. Ellison was calm, thorough, ran balance tests, checked Cody's reflexes and posture. It could be a number of things, he said, but based on your history, it might be minor neurological disruption, possibly connected to the other symptoms. When blood flow to certain areas of the brain fluctuates, balance is often one of the first things affected. Cody nodded, but inside something tightened. He hadn't realized how much he relied on the simple act of standing, walking, moving through space without question. The doctor suggested physical therapy, nothing intense, just some basic balance work. It's not about building strength, he said. It's about rebuilding trust between your brain and your body. Sarah found a local therapist who specialized in post-TIA mobility. The woman's name was Marnie. She was soft-spoken, probably in her late 40s, with a steady gaze and patient hands. Cody liked her instantly. Their sessions were simple. Step onto a soft pad, balance on one foot, close your eyes, and hold your stance. At first, Cody wobbled like a tree in a storm, but after a few weeks, he noticed small improvements. His feet stopped second-guessing the floor. At home, Sarah laid out a yoga mat in the living room. Each morning, Cody would do a few quiet movements while the kettle boiled. Nothing fancy, just stretches, breathing, a few slow steps with eyes closed, trusting that the ground would stay where it belonged. One evening, after dinner, Sarah offered him a banana. Potassium, she said. Good for nerves, muscles, balance. He took it, peeled it slowly. All this food talk, he said with a smirk, starting to think you're trying to rebuild me from the grocery store up. Exactly, she said, one banana at a time. That night, Cody sat out on the porch, feet planted firmly beneath him, listening to the cicadas hum in the trees. He realized something then. Balance wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional. It was the quiet discipline of noticing when life leans too far and learning how to shift your weight gently back. He wasn't fully steady yet, some days still dipped, but he was learning, listening, trusting his feet again. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something stronger than before. The word stroke used to sound like a final chapter to Cody. A dramatic event, something sudden and irreversible. When people talked about strokes, they always mentioned what came after. The cane, the wheelchair, the silence that never left their voice. But that word TIA, that one crept in differently. Transient ischemic attack. Cody remembered when Dr. Ellison first said it. He'd nodded like he understood, but deep down he hadn't. It sounded so clinical, so temporary, transient, as if something could pass through your brain, leave no scar, and still threaten to take everything. The second TIA came on a quiet Sunday. Cody had been reading on the porch, nothing heavy, just an old novel he'd meant to finish years ago. Sarah was inside humming while folding laundry. The sky was soft with late afternoon light. Nothing felt wrong until his hand slipped off the book. Just like that. No pain, no tingling, just gone. For a moment, his right hand didn't belong to him. He looked at it resting in his lap, open and loose like a stranger's. Then his mouth tried to form a sentence. He wanted to call for Sarah, but the words tangled up. Not slurred this time, just missing. Like they'd fallen behind a door he couldn't open. It lasted under 2 minutes. By the time Sarah came out, he was sitting up straighter, book in his lap, hand back to moving. But his face must have said everything. You felt it again, she whispered. He nodded, eyes wet. They drove to the hospital. This time there was no doubt. A TIA, confirmed by the scan. No damage, but a clear sign that a larger stroke was waiting if he didn't act. The doctor was kind, but didn't sugarcoat it. Think of it like a fire alarm that goes off, even though the house isn't burning yet. You don't wait until it is. You change the wiring. Fast. Cody felt the weight of it that night, lying in bed beside Sarah. His body had betrayed him, again, but with just enough mercy to leave a trace. A whisper, a memory. He had been given another chance. And this time, he understood exactly what that meant. The next morning, he brewed chamomile tea, something he hadn't done since his mother passed. It reminded him of her, how she used to say, when something stirs inside you, don't ignore it. That's your body telling you to come home. He stood at the window, sipping slowly, hand now strong, voice now sure. But his mind was sharper than it had been in months, not in a brilliant way, but in a grateful one. He started walking earlier in the day when the streets were still quiet and the light was gentle. He carried his phone, set a reminder to breathe, to hydrate, to sit when needed. Not out of fear, but out of respect. His body wasn't a machine anymore, it was a messenger. And now he was finally listening. Sarah bought him a journal, not the kind with prompts or quotes, just blank pages, bound in soft brown leather. He began to write, not essays, not reflections, just moments. Sunday, 5:14 p.m. My hand let go without asking. My voice followed, but they both came back. I came back. That's what matters. One day he ran into Walt at the gas station. You're looking good, Walt said, patting Cody on the back. Heard about your health scare. You all right now? Cody paused. I think so, he said, but it wasn't really a scare. No, it was a wake-up. Scares come and go. This stuck. Walt nodded, thoughtful. Well, you're still here. That's what counts. Cody smiled. Exactly. That night, Sarah made a soup with lentils and spinach. Good for circulation, she said, and your brain. Cody spooned it slowly, savoring every bite, every flavor, every small thing that he now saw as a gift. The TIA didn't take anything permanent from him, but it gave him something he hadn't expected, a pause, a doorway back to his life. And this time, he was stepping through with his eyes wide open. Cody hated the word mini. It made the whole thing sound like a speed bump, something harmless, something you could ignore on your way to somewhere else. But there was nothing small about what had happened to him, not the fear, not the silence in his throat when the words stopped, and certainly not the days that followed, when everything he did felt like walking a tightrope. It was Sarah who brought it up again a few days later as they sat in the garden. "They shouldn't call it that," she said, hands busy pruning the lavender. "Mini stroke. Makes it sound like it didn't count." Cody nodded, pulling weeds gently from between the stone path. "But it did," he said. "It counted a lot." That was the part people didn't understand. The TIA hadn't left scars anyone could see. He still walked fine. His speech had returned. His hand had its grip again, but inside, everything had shifted. The way he moved through a room, the way he tracked time, the way he scanned for tiny signals from his own body, it was all different now. At his follow-up appointment, Dr. Ellison leaned forward and tapped a folder. "I want to be clear, Cody," he said. "TIAs are not mini. They're warnings. They are strokes. They just reverse themselves before the damage sets in. But next time, if there's a next time, it might not." Cody nodded. He wasn't scared in the same way anymore. It wasn't the panic of a man afraid to die. It was the weight of a man who had seen just how easily life can slip without so much as a warning bell. Back at home, he found himself slowing down even more, not out of weakness, but out of reverence. He started taking breaks between tasks, letting his breath catch up, letting the silence speak when it needed to. And one morning, after noticing a strange flutter in his chest, a beat too fast, then a pause, he didn't wait. He called Sarah and she drove him to the clinic. No drama, just attention. The EKG showed nothing alarming, but Dr. Ellison was glad he came. "You're doing exactly what I hoped," the doctor said. "You're treating your life like it matters." That night, Sarah made grilled salmon and steamed greens. "Omega-3s again," she said, placing the plate in front of him. "Anti-inflammatory, heart-loving, brain-loving," Cody chuckled. "I feel like your science project." "No," she said, smiling. "You're my investment." He liked that. They started sitting outside after dinner, just the two of them, watching the sun dip behind the trees. Sometimes they didn't talk. Sometimes they did. Cody found himself bringing up old memories, things he hadn't thought about in years, his father's laugh, the first car he ever fixed, the time he broke his collarbone in 8th grade. Sarah listened with that stillness he'd always admired. He realized he was trying to gather pieces, not because he was afraid of losing them, but because he'd been reminded how precious it was to still have them. He no longer told people he'd had a mini stroke. When it came up, he'd say, "I had a TIA, a warning stroke. My body gave me one last knock before the real door closed." And people listened. Sometimes their eyes softened. Sometimes they looked away. But more than once, someone leaned in and said, "That happened to my uncle, my neighbor, my mom." It was never really small. One afternoon, Cody pulled out his old toolbox from the shed. He hadn't touched it in months. The metal was cold, the handles worn smooth. He took out a few screwdrivers, wiped them down, placed them back. Then he did something unexpected. He wrote a note. "If I'm ever not myself again, check my words, check my hands, check if I can find the right tool without looking." He folded the note, placed it inside the lid, and shut it gently. He wasn't being morbid. He was being thorough, just like he'd always been. And more than anything, he was honoring the truth of what he'd learned. There's no such thing as a mini stroke, only a message. And this time, he had answered it. The word aneurysm had always sounded distant to Cody, like something that happened to other people, unlucky, random, a word you read in the obituary section or heard whispered in hospital halls. Not something that belonged in his chart, not something that might be inside his brain right now, hiding like a shadow no one had thought to look for. It was during one of the follow-up appointments that Dr. Ellison brought it up. "You're doing all the right things, Cody," he said, tapping his notes. "But given your age, the TIAs, and your family history, I want to run a few extra checks, just to be safe." Cody raised an eyebrow. Safe from what? Aneurysms. The word dropped like a stone in water. Cody looked over at Sarah, who'd come with him that day, knitting silently in the corner. Her fingers paused mid-stitch. "I thought those just happened out of nowhere," Cody said. Dr. Ellison leaned in slightly. "Sometimes they do, but more often they grow quietly over time. Like a weak spot in a garden hose. You don't notice anything until it bursts." He explained how some aneurysms could sit in the brain for years, unruptured, unnoticed, and how, in certain cases, like Cody's, they could be found early, monitored, even treated before disaster struck. "Does anyone in your family ever have one?" the doctor asked. Cody blinked. "My Uncle Henry," he said slowly. "Collapsed at 62. They said it was a stroke. But now that I think of it, maybe it wasn't." That night, back home, Cody sat in the living room holding his cup of tea with both hands. Sarah came in quietly. "You're thinking about Henry," she said. "I'm thinking about a lot of things." She sat beside him. "We're going to get the scan. Whatever it finds or doesn't find, we'll face it." Cody nodded, eyes fixed on the quiet flicker of the lamp. The scan was scheduled for the following week. A cerebral angiogram. He didn't tell many people, just Walt and his daughter, Rachel. The waiting was the worst part, not the test, but the silence afterward. The space between knowing something might be there and not knowing what. When the results came, they were both a relief and a riddle. There was a small aneurysm, less than 5 mm. Not dangerous, for now, but it was real. It was his. Cody held the report in his hands like a fragile bird. "You've probably had it for years," Dr. Ellison said, "and you might have it for many more without ever feeling a thing. But now we know, and now we watch it." Back at home, Sarah made him a turmeric lentil stew. "Anti-inflammatory," she said. "Everything yellow and golden and good." Cody laughed softly. "You think you can shrink an aneurysm with soup?" "I think I can love you through it," she replied. That night, Cody stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, not to examine his face, but to remember it. He traced the curve of his forehead, the line of his jaw, the slight arch of his brow. Inside that skull was something small, silent, sleeping, and yet he didn't feel afraid. He felt lucky. Because now he knew, in the weeks that followed, he became gentler with himself. He said no to unnecessary stress. He started meditating, just 10 minutes in the morning, sitting by the window, listening to his breath. It wasn't about fighting anything, it was about meeting himself, fully, exactly as he was. One day, while sorting through a drawer, Cody found a photo of Uncle Henry, grinning at a family picnic, soda in hand, eyes squinting from the sun. Cody stared at it for a long time. "I wish you'd had this chance," he whispered. He tucked the photo into the journal Sarah gave him. On the next page, he wrote, "There's something in my brain that might one day try to take me. But today, I took it first. I saw it, I named it, and I'm still here." Aneurysms aren't always quiet, but Cody had learned how to listen louder. The hardest part, Cody would later say, wasn't the warning stroke. It wasn't the numb hand or the blurred vision or the headache that rang like a bell through his skull. No, the hardest part was realizing that he was the kind of person this could happen to. He had always considered himself healthy, strong, the kind of man who stayed active, didn't smoke, never spent a single night in the hospital since his appendix came out in '74. Even after retirement, he kept busy, fixing things around the house, walking every morning, laughing often. He didn't drink much, never touched fast food. He was the guy people pointed at and said, "Now there's someone doing it right." So when he told his friend Walt about the TIA, Walt's response stung more than he expected. "But you're one of the healthy ones," Cody smiled faintly. "So I thought." And for a while, that thought spiraled. It crept into his walks, his quiet moments, the evenings when the wind stirred just enough to make him feel small. If I did everything right, why did this still happen? Sarah heard it in his silence. She always did. That night, she sat across from him, stirring a cup of warm almond milk with a dash of cinnamon. "You keep asking yourself what you did wrong," she said gently. "But maybe it's not about wrong. Maybe it's about not knowing yet." Cody looked up. "What do you mean?" "You can eat well, sleep well, live well, and still have weak spots in the wiring. Sometimes it's stress. Sometimes it's family history. Sometimes it's just time catching up." He sighed. I worked so hard not to end up like my dad. I know, she said, but that's why you caught it early. That's why you're still here. It helped, but the doubt lingered. A few days later, during a walk with their daughter Rachel and her 2 kids, Cody paused near the creek that ran behind the park. The light shimmered on the water. His grandson tugged at his hand. "Pops, race me to the bench." Cody hesitated, then nodded. "You're on." They didn't run fast. Cody knew his limits, but his legs moved, his lungs expanded, his heart thudded gently, not in panic, but in presence. Afterward, he sat, catching his breath, smiling. Rachel handed him a water bottle. "You good?" "Yeah," he said. "Better than I thought." Later that week, he saw Dr. Ellison again. "You look better," the doctor said. "Brighter." Cody nodded. "Been thinking a lot about how this whole thing changes how you see yourself." Ellison leaned forward. "Cody, you'd be surprised how many of my healthiest patients end up in here. Marathon runners, nurses, gym instructors. They do everything right, and something still gives." "Why?" The doctor shrugged gently. "Because we're human. Because genetics. Because stress isn't just what you feel, it's what your body carries. Because invisible things build up over time." That was the turning point. Cody stopped seeing his body as something he hadn't done enough for. He started seeing it as something that had carried him all this way, warning lights and all. It hadn't failed him. It had protected him for years until it couldn't anymore. And now it was asking for help. He leaned into the small things. More nuts, more leafy greens. A glass of pomegranate juice in the morning, not because a headline said it would save him, but because he liked the taste, and it made him feel awake. He started sleeping earlier, letting the evening stretch without needing to fill it. Some nights he wrote in his journal. Others he simply sat outside with Sarah, listening to the night. One evening, as they watched the stars come out, he said, "You know what the scariest thing is?" "What?" "How close I came to thinking I was invincible." Sarah smiled softly. "And now? I know I'm not, but I'm not broken either." She took his hand. "Exactly." Cody hadn't failed at health. He had simply outlived the illusion that health meant protection, that eating kale and walking laps made you bulletproof. No, health was something else. Health was hearing the whisper before the storm. Health was showing up for your body the way it had shown up for you for decades. Health was humility and courage and kindness, and Cody, once strong, then scared, was now all three. Cody had never liked tests, not in school, not at work, and certainly not in hospitals. Tests meant waiting. Tests meant uncertainty. And now, at 66, it felt like his entire life had become one long scan, poke, or number on a screen. But there was one test, one quiet little procedure that changed the course of everything for him. And he almost said no. It happened 2 months after his second TIA. Dr. Ellison had reviewed all his labs, gone over his medications, diet, and sleep patterns. Then he suggested a heart rhythm monitor. Just to rule out atrial fibrillation, the doctor said. It's a common trigger for strokes, even in people who feel perfectly fine. Cody raised an eyebrow. "You think I have a heart problem now?" Ellison smiled. "I think we haven't looked there yet, and it's worth ruling out. A simple patch. You wear it for a few days, no pain, no fuss, but it could show us something important." Cody hesitated. He felt fine. His heart didn't race. He didn't feel faint. But Sarah nudged him gently in the car afterward. "It's a what if we can get ahead of." So he agreed. They placed the patch on his chest, a thin square smaller than a bandage. It recorded his heartbeat for 72 hours. Cody almost forgot it was there, until the call came. "There's something," Dr. Ellison said. "It's brief, comes and goes, but your heart's fluttering now and then, just enough to make your blood slow down. Enough that it could have been behind the clots that caused your TIAs." Cody swallowed. "So, that's it?" "It might be, and now we can treat it. There's a medication that helps your heart stay in rhythm, and more importantly, it keeps clots from forming." That night, Cody sat with the new prescription bottle in his palm. It was small, simple, but he couldn't stop staring at it. "One little test," he said to Sarah. "I almost skipped it." "But you didn't," she said, pouring chamomile into their mugs. "You listened," he nodded. "Not sure I used to know how." The next morning, he took the pill with water, just like the others now in his routine. Blood pressure, cholesterol, magnesium, flax oil. And then he walked to the porch, sat in the sun, and wrote one sentence in his journal. Sometimes the smallest test shows you the biggest truth. Cody didn't become a man obsessed with numbers. He didn't check his heart rate every hour or live in fear. But he lived with a quiet confidence now, one that came from knowing, not guessing. He told Walt about the patch, told his brother, even brought it up to his barber during a trim. "You ever get that checked?" he asked casually as the cape flapped around his shoulders. "Checked what?" "Your heart rhythm." "Nah," the barber laughed. "Why?" Cody looked at him. "Because I felt fine too." Later that week, the barber called him, said he scheduled a scan. Cody smiled quietly. That was the ripple effect, the kind you never see coming. One test, one thread pulled gently at the right time. And everything that could have unraveled didn't. He and Sarah celebrated that night with grilled vegetables and a shared bottle of sparkling water. "You know," Cody said, "I used to think you only went to the doctor when something was wrong." Sarah raised her glass. "And now I think you go when something's right and you want to keep it that way." She smiled. "That sounds like the healthiest thing you've ever said." He laughed, and in that soft light, with his heart steady, Cody felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Safe. Cody sat by the window, journal in his lap, sunlight warming the hardwood beneath his bare feet. Outside, the early spring leaves rustled like a soft conversation. He could hear birds again, something he hadn't truly noticed before all this began. Not because they weren't singing then, but because he hadn't been listening. He turned a page and stared at the blank space in front of him. There were only a few pages left in the journal Sarah had given him. Months ago, he would have filled them with repairs he needed to make, names of tools, grocery lists. But now every line held moments that almost disappeared before he caught them. He wrote, "If I had seen a video like this a year ago, I might have taken the numbness seriously. I might have caught the whispers before they turned into shouts. But I didn't, and I'm lucky to still be here." He paused. It wasn't shame that filled him. It wasn't regret exactly. It was something softer, something like understanding. Because back then, Cody didn't know what a TIA felt like. He didn't know that extreme fatigue could be more than just getting older. He didn't know a fleeting moment of blurred vision, or a slight drop in blood pressure, or a hand that took an extra second to move could all be preludes to something that might change or end everything. Back then, Cody was like most people. He assumed the warning signs came in flashing lights and loud alarms. But now he knew the truth. They often come in silence, in whispers, in little slips we write off, in a moment when your keys fall and you think, "That was weird," and move on. Sarah came into the room with 2 mugs of warm barley tea. She'd swapped their evening chamomile for this new blend a few weeks ago after reading about its heart-healthy benefits. "Finishing your journal?" she asked. "Almost." She sat beside him, pressing her knee gently against his. "You going to start another one?" "Maybe," Cody said, "but not just for me." He turned the journal toward her. "I think I want to share this." "With the kids?" "With anyone who'll listen. I think people need to hear this before they end up where I was." She nodded. "They do." And so they did. A few weeks later, with the help of their daughter Rachel and her tech-savvy husband, Cody recorded a video. Just him in the living room, no script, just his story. He talked about the fatigue, the headaches, the vision, the slurred words, the way his own hand had gone missing for a moment. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't play expert. He just told the truth, like a neighbor speaking over the fence. At the end, he said, "If I had seen a video like this back then, I might have taken my life more seriously sooner. Maybe you will now." They uploaded it to a simple page, shared it in their senior group, sent it to a few friends. Cody didn't expect much, but slowly, people started writing back. Walt called to say he scheduled his own heart rhythm scan. A woman from church pulled Sarah aside to thank her. Her husband had seen the video, noticed numbness in his hand, and went to the doctor just in time. Even their granddaughter shared it on her school's community health board. Cody didn't become famous. He didn't go viral, but he became something else, useful. He had always liked being useful. One evening, Sarah found him sitting outside, journal in hand, smiling at nothing in particular. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He looked at her and said, "I think I might be okay after all." And in that moment, beneath the soft sky, hand steady, words clear, breath full and even, he was. Cody's story wasn't one of tragedy, it was one of awakening. It began with something small, a numb hand, a tired morning, a word that wouldn't come. And like so many of us, he brushed it off. He told himself it was just age, just stress, just life. But those little moments were not random. They were signals, warnings, whispers from a body that had carried him for over 6 decades, now asking to be heard. Through each turn, vision blurring, balance slipping, a fleeting headache that felt different, Cody changed, not overnight, not all at once, but slowly, gently. He began to listen to the quiet parts, to notice, to trust that even the softest message from his body mattered. And when the truth came, a TIA, a lurking aneurysm, a fluttering heart, he didn't collapse into fear. He stood up in the middle of it. He made tea, he changed routines. He held Sarah's hand and said, "I'm listening now." That's the power of noticing. That's the difference between waiting for something to break and choosing to mend it first. So if you've seen a piece of yourself in Cody, if you've brushed off the fatigue, the brain fog, the stumble, the slurred word, let this be your turning point too. Call your doctor, ask questions, take the walk, swap the food, listen to your body, not for fear, but for respect. You are not too old. It is not too late. Your body may be whispering, it's time to listen. And like Cody, it just might save your life.